I'm Matt Booker.
I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Brandon Hobson, and this is Concavity Show.
Hey, Brandon,
Okay,
welcome
great.
back onto the show. This is episode 88 now of Concavity Show. And Brandon, this is your return visit. You were on before in August of 2021. So that was 4.5 years ago, just about now. And you were actually the first Concavity Show guest we ever had on after we kind of did our little recalibration from The Great Concavity. So it's really cool to have you back on the show all these years later, catch up a little bit, talk about your new book, The Devil is a Southpaw, which came out in October of this year. We were hoping to get you on a little bit earlier and have it more around your release date, but life's busy for adult people with little kids and all that. But it's great to get you on here in December and talk about your wonderful new book. So welcome back.
It's great to be here.
Thanks again for being here, Brandon. Yeah, it's really great to have you back on. I did have the pleasure of hanging out a bit with you last year when you were a featured speaker at our David Foster Wallace conference in Austin.
Oh yeah,
And
you were there, right?
in 2024, you read some excerpts from this book that were forthcoming at the time. So it was really exciting to hear what was still then a work in progress versus now reading the finished book. So for people who are not familiar with your work, Brandon is the author of a handful of books, starting with the last one we interviewed you for, which was The Removed. And prior to that, your novel, Where the Dead Sit Talking, was a finalist for the National Book Award for fiction. And that was sort of your big breakout, right? Like you had these two books before that that were smaller in nature, I would say. Deep Ellum, your first book, I really love because it's set in Texas, where I live. And Deep Ellum, I grew up outside of Dallas, and Deep Ellum was always like the cool neighborhood we wanted to aspire to, uh, with an element of danger. So that's a great novel. If you haven't read Deep Ellum, and you're a fan, I would say, of the genre of fiction where kind of nothing happens. A guy sort of wanders around and just lives his life, which
Right.
I'm a big fan of. Check out Deep Ellum. Your next book, Desolation of Avenues Untold, was really interesting change, and I wanted to mention that book because I think there's some similarities between that book and the book we're going to talk about today, The Devil is a Southpaw. Um, so Desolation of Avenues Untold, Where the Dead Sit Talking, The Removed. I believe you also have a YA book in
I
there.
do, yeah. Kind of a young reader called The Storyteller, Scholastic
Oh
published.
right.
The Storyteller. Um, Brandon is also an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation tribe of Oklahoma. That comes into play, I would say, in the last three books,
Mm-hmm.
maybe all your books in a way. But um, and I would say Brandon and I originally met over email about like 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I was
So
just reading back the transcript today of our last episode, and that
So
featured on the last
the
episode.
idea
Yeah.
of Brandon Hobson is something that I have known about for a very long time,
Quarter century or so.
before he was even a writer. And Brandon famously wrote a letter to David Foster Wallace before Infinite Jest came out, before
It's like 91 or 90 or two, somewhere in there.
It was in March. Well, yeah, March of
Yeah.
'93,
Okay.
actually. And that's his letter dated back to me. So I think it came back pretty quickly.
yeah.
But yeah, that was pre Infinite Jest, and just I had read the first two, so
And then you faxed that letter to Matt. I remember we talked about last time.
It was a
fax machine days.
I think, Matt, you asked me to read it, and I was like, absolutely, I can make a copy, and I was going to mail it to you or something, and you were at work, and you said, why don't you just fax it over? And I faxed it over. And,
Yeah, it was a different time, man.
Yeah.
This was pre social media existing. This was
oh, yeah.
pre everything. And one thing I love about that letter, Brandon, is that you say in your letter to him that you're working at like B. Dalton's in the mall,
Right.
or the equivalent of, was it B. Dalton's? I think it
It
was.
was. Yeah, it was when I
Yeah,
was in
the
college.
bookstore, right?
Yeah, it's a
in the
mall
mall. Yeah,
chain of bookstores, which
I've
is
never heard of
really
that
blue.
chain in Canada, so I think
really.
it must be
Oh,
U.S. Yeah.
And they, I think, also own some other, like Walden Books owned them, or they bought Walden Books or something. But
I,
um,
yeah, they were both in the mall, and
yeah,
yeah, I worked at B. Dalton's, and had mentioned that. I wish I actually. I'm probably glad I don't have the letter I wrote him. There's no telling what all I admitted to or
Yeah,
or
overshared.
said in it,
Yeah.
but
but
probably horribly written.
you asked him for advice, and
Mhm.
I think he also mentioned that that thing of the sort of bleakness of working in a corporate chain. But it made you a really good reader because obviously you had read a ton of books. And when you work in a bookstore, this is one of the perks, is that you have to sort of be aware of like all of the books that people would want to buy and like
Yeah.
ask about. And so I think your knowledge as a reader, and I mean, I grew up in a similar sort of town where like there are not a lot of other bookstores. Like this is kind of the main option, one of the main options that people could
Yeah.
walk around and pick up a book.
And
Um,
those were the years of not only seeing what's coming through the bookstore, but also um, sitting in the public library and just sort of going through and just, I mean, whole afternoons at either at the university or the downtown library, and just going, just just a discovery of things. And so that was, yeah, it was a different time. Yeah.
it was a different time, and as someone who has then followed your career from um, sort of non-writer to publishing your first book and then your second book, I wanted to bring that up because I think there are some similar themes in this book that you've returned to. So that second book had a lot to do with like maybe a hidden secret sex tape of Charlie Chaplin's. And
Mhm.
this is a really cool premise, but there was actually a lot in there about Oklahoma, not specifically about native peoples. And
Right.
then your third book, which was, like I said, your breakout, where probably sold a ton more than any of your others combined, and got all this attention, and the National Book Award sort of changed your life, I would say.
Yeah.
You followed that up with The Removed, which was more spiritual in some ways, more
Mm-hmm.
mystical in some ways,
Yeah.
but also had some similar, more in common with Where the Dead Sit Talking. And this book, this new book, I think it has some elements of Where the Dead Sit Talking and The Removed, but
Yeah,
there's a
totally. Mm-hmm.
lot of return to your earlier self, which was very focused on aesthetics and metafiction and a bunch of literary references
Mm-hmm.
and fun and experimentation. And we mentioned these cameos that have sort of famous people make, doppelgängers, all this sort of
Yeah.
playfulness
Yeah.
that was in the the Charlie Chaplin book, I think is now coming back to that. So this is my very long setup to a first question for you, which is like, what was that process like for you? And talking a bit about the book, where how would you describe it in your sort of oeuvre so far? Like, how did you end up in this place?
Yeah, when I wrote Where the Dead Sit Talking, which is the the first one, that book really that addresses native identity and native, specifically a native character, in great length. I wasn't thinking so much that that would be of interest to the readers, and I think a lot of the attention that that book got had to do with the fact that it was kind of considered a native book. Um, and my work before that didn't address native identity so much, where it was, whereas afterwards The Removed, and certainly this one in some ways, addresses it a little bit more. Part of that is my earlier work sort of following my love of writing, really. And, sometimes we just want to write stories that are completely different from something else we've done.
Hmm.
Or, I mean, I'm the type of writer, I think, Matt, you probably are too, to some extent, that explores, this element of pleasure that we get from writing. And the reason we go to reading is not just simply to be entertained or something, but it's, there's some work involved. And like I think most English majors would say, why are you, you know, what, um, there's an element of pleasure involved in what many would see as work, right? Like,
Hmm.
there's too much, there's too much of a non-linear narrative happening here. I'm having to think too much, or I'm having to do too much work to try to figure stuff out. And, for me, that's fun. And I think probably, I would guess that your listeners are probably a lot like us.
Yeah, they're hard workers. I think they have
Yeah,
field notes next to their novels. They're
right.
jotting stuff down.
Yeah,
I have field notes
sure.
right here.
Yeah, I know you
But
do.
I would say, I have a couple follow up questions on that. But before we go any further, I feel like we need to
Summarize the book.
summarize the book a bit, which is really hard, to your
Yeah.
point.
Hmm.
And I think that idea of like a more difficult book is tougher sell. Like in my experience, if you're trying to get someone to read something and you say like, oh, it's about a road trip and then they're all going to Disneyland and it's about like California, people are like, oh, okay, I get that. If you just be if you're like, well, it's about a lot of different themes and there's a bunch of characters and there's like, it's
Yeah.
really hard to summarize, but I'm going to give it a shot. And I'm just going to read the back cover. No, I'm not going to. I'm not going to do. I'm not going to do that. Whoever wrote the back cover copy, though, did a pretty good job, I would say, because
Yeah.
there is a framing device in the book of a sort of novel within the novel. There's two
Hmm.
kids, juveniles, I would say, who are locked up in detention center. One of them is named Milton Muleborn, and he's the one sort of writing the book within the book, which has the same title also as some other stuff in the book. The Devil is a Southpaw. But really, the focus of the book is this guy Matthew Ichota. He is a painter, an artist,
Poet.
also a writer, and that period when they're locked up, it's sort of nonlinear, right? Because that's in the
Hmm.
late '80s. There's an escape that happens, a jailbreak, and then we sort of go back in time and then go forward in time and learn what did they do to get in the jail, what did they do after they got out,
Hmm.
and so there's a lot of sort of collage like pieces that fit in there, and have a bunch of questions about the format of that because you play around with it, right? Like there's letters, there's
Hmm.
artwork, there's um, s- different styles all throughout, and some of that you're mimicking what you think. I think what Milton Muleborn would say or write,
Right.
and so in that format, one of the first things that jumped out to me was two things. One, a lot of the literary references that he's trying to work in there. So he's sort of like uh, your doppelganger for trying to write a difficult novel in some ways, and I think you're probably more successful than Milton Muleborn. But the other thing that jumped out at me was the vocabulary. Like he's
Hmm.
putting in all this like kind of crazy vocabulary words, and as a reader at first you're trying to make sense of this and being like, is this straightforward, or is this a reliable narrator? So talk a little bit about those two things, the literary references in Milton's book, and then sort of the process for the vocabulary words. Like how did you come up with that, and how did you end up, I don't know, getting a
Yeah.
thesaurus out?
Yeah. The literary references. I was wanting Milton to think about books like Dante, right? Dante's
Right. Yeah.
Inferno, and reference that Paradise Lost, obviously a nod to his name. There's some Joyce stuff in there from a couple of,
Dublin, old Dublin.
yes, Old
Yeah.
Dublin,
Dubland.
and
Yeah.
and a couple of sentences nodding to Ulysses, and that's just again his attempt. I wanted to write a book about art also, and the importance of art, and
Mm-hmm.
um, a way for me to use my own art as a narrative device, which was fun because I'm not a great artist. You know,
Oh, I don't know
I
about
And these are all your original drawings
these
and
are yeah,
painting,
these
right,
are
throughout the
my
book?
those are
Yeah.
Matthew Ichota's original
Well,
drawings.
sure, yeah.
yeah.
Drawn by Brandon Hobson. Yeah,
Right,
through the
right. And so
conduit
that
of.
was part of it, right? Is
Yeah.
that these sort of these drawings, you know, writing or drawing through the lens of a character was fun. But uh, the you know the poems, these are these different kind of type of collage to create this nonlinear narrative, at least for part, well, the whole book actually, but especially part one, is Milton's sort of attempt to write, you know, this what he feels is an important book of fiction that is as for someone who hasn't gotten any success is better than his former classmate. And so I was thinking about, you know, the envy, how artists envy each other, and writers especially in MFA programs and all over. All they do is, you know, they pretend to be happy for others, but they're, you know, I see this with students, you know, um, that there's a lot of envy going on, right? That
Mm-hmm.
when someone gets you know, something published or gets some success or something, and um, that, you know, that's not the main theme, of course, of the book, but I do feel like there's, you know, writers get jealous of each other, and
Around book festivals sometimes. Um,
certainly, yeah, book festivals.
We totally weren't talking about that before we hit record today, right?
uh, but you know, one other thing that maybe we haven't mentioned directly here is that almost all the books we've mentioned, pretty much all of them, sort of focus on younger characters. And there's some, I wanted to ask you about that theme of, you know, your interest in young people. That's one of the themes from
Where the Dead Sit
all of your
Talking.
books. Well, all of your books is there's some interest in going back on that. And I'm just wondering, when you are thinking of, you know, a fictional character, are you just naturally more drawn to like things that you experienced in your past?
that's part of it. Also, I just like youthful characters, and I think there's kind of a there's an opportunity to be a little bit more sort of playful in the kind of random
Mm-hmm.
dialogue and things that
And life choices, maybe.
life choices and behaviors
Yeah.
that, you know, a 15-year-old is going to react to differently than someone who's, you know, 40. That
Yeah.
um, and and so that's part of it. Is there's an attraction to that kind of behavior.
Uh,
Um,
and, and
yeah,
another sort of, you know, consequence of that in this book is that then you get the experience of sort of seeing them when they're older. So there's another side to that of like, do the things that go wrong for them in their youth shape who they become,
Mm-hmm.
or do they overcome it? And
right.
you know, that is unique. And I was thinking, and unique for your sort of body of work here. And I was thinking, you know, with when you were talking earlier about Where the Dead Sit Talking and The Removed, that kind of success that you've had sort of buys you, or do you think it buys you a lot of freedom to sort of write whatever you want now? Do you feel any pressure to like follow that up? Because you already did a follow up to Where the Dead Sit Talking. Like, do you feel pretty free to like write whatever you want?
Well, I did. This was a two book in my contract. It's a novel, which is this one, The Devil is a Southpaw, and then I'm under contract for a story collection, which is next.
Mm.
So I only turned in about 50 pages for the novel, and I all I really put was this is a novel about native characters.
Right.
I had I tried to get this published earlier on in my career, I wouldn't be surprised if, of course, nobody would have taken it, except maybe a very small press, like with Desolation.
Yeah.
I just don't think that it's for at least American readers. It's a small percentage, I would think, who would be interested in it. It's certainly not book clubs. It feels like.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not one piece. You've mentioned, there's part one, part two, part three, but they're not linear, right? Like it's not really, oh, first this happens and then this happens. There's a lot of sort of meta narratives going on. There's a lot of internal references to other characters, and a lot of the framing. Um, it's an interesting format, and so I wanted to ask you about, like, did that just come naturally to you, or did you do a lot of like revising?
Oh, I did a lot of revising on it. Yeah, I moved stuff around a lot, and especially as I. Oh, and I forgotten to mention you'd asked me about the vocabulary too. That was part of it too. Was that's something that in the revision I started focusing more on. Like
Oh,
that,
yeah,
that
okay.
the vocabulary came later. Some of those really difficult words. The more that I thought and understood Milton, the stronger I felt for his character to want to try to write this
One
kind
up.
of difficult,
Yeah.
wild, nonlinear short novel. Um, the more I had fun sort of going through and adding sort of very strange and difficult vocabulary.
Yeah, I gotta say, like, I needed to look up probably on average about a word every like page or
Well,
two, like
you know what? A
words I've
lot of those words.
never seen before.
McCarthy's early book. It's the one
Child of
Wallace.
God.
No, the one Wallace loved.
Blood Meridian.
No, the big one.
Suttree.
Yes, sorry, Setri. Thank you. Yeah,
I'll get there eventually.
Setri has extremely difficult vocabulary,
Oh, okay. I've
and
not attempted that one. Yeah.
and and I've gone through. Yeah, I read that. I read that book a long time ago, but I went back through it because I remember like this book has a. This is the language of this is really difficult,
Hmm.
and I had highlighted so many words
Yeah.
in there that I'm like, I had to look up.
Yeah. And then you kind of
And
contrast that with the road, where the language is generally pretty accessible, and
sure.
the writing style is really minimal. We talked about this about The Removed when you were on last time, that there's
Hmm.
kind of like a really kind of like accessibility to the prose of that book. And this one kind of elevates the language again because of this narrator, right? Like
Yeah.
we talked about in the Removed, most of the characters are kind of blue collar. They're not like literary professors or anything like that. But here we have Milton, who's like has a more elevated kind of sensibility, literary sensibility. So it's cool that like in a meta way that comes through in the way the story is told and the language that's used.
And I also wanted to do something that I felt was very different than
Mm.
my other work. I don't want to keep writing
Sure.
the
Yeah.
same sort of book or the same story. Brian Evanson, the writer at um, told me one time. He just said, don't let publishing push you in a specific direction,
Hmm.
or readers push you into a specific direction. Do what you want to do. He said more or less, and that's another teacher of mine actually said the same thing early on. Stuart Onan, the writer, um, said something very similar, which is, do your own thing. And so I feel like in some ways my style early on of Where the Dead Sit Talking and Deep Ellum, that's kind of very minimalist in their descriptions,
Mm-hmm.
very spare language, spare scenes, short chapters. So I wanted to do something different, and
Mm-hmm.
that I could, which I did early on with Desolation. I think that Desolation is not. I don't think it's a difficult book, but it it's kind of wild, and it was a lot of fun to write. Uh, I'm not real proud of that book, honestly. I feel like that it's a little bit too slapsticky in places, and
Well, and I compared it to Pynchon because I think Pynchon is also pretty slapsticky
Yeah, for sure.
yeah,
and full of vocabulary words as well. And I don't know if he does this or you do this, but I know Wallace does it. A bunch of other writers like collect words. So like either in a little notebook or note cards or something of like you see a word and be like, wow, I got to figure a way to work
I
that
gotta rock that.
into some point.
Yeah.
And Wallace would just have pages and pages of words that he would collect and sort of look up later or try to work into things. And I think that they're really evocative. And I mean, it can be sort of affected and it can be really successful if a word works well in the title. So one of those words for me is Southpaw. And
Mhm.
for people who aren't familiar with baseball, do you want to explain what a Southpaw is?
sure, yeah. So Southpaw is a left-handed, generally a pitcher,
Mhm.
and is referred to as a south.
Sinistral.
So what?
Sinistral is a word that comes to mind. Speaking of Wallace here,
Yeah,
the wraith.
and do you want to explain why? Like, why is it Southpaw?
I don't know that I can answer that question.
Yeah,
I don't.
sure. All right. Well,
You
let me just. I didn't mean to put you on
edit
the
that
spot.
out.
There. We'll cut
History
that
of
out and
baseball
say.
question from Matt here.
Let me
Unsurprisingly,
just say that the idea is that it's a left-handed pitcher, and the when you're standing on the mound facing the batter, your left hand doesn't have the glove on it, right? And that is like facing south. A paw is like hand, right? But
yeah.
like facing south. But Dave, you bring up Sinistral, right, which is
Hmm.
also left-handed,
Yeah.
and there that has its roots in sinister, right? Like
The
that,
Bible, right? Like
right? That it
the
was
right hand of
considered
God, and
like
left-handedness was considered like satanic or
devil,
demonic.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. And so there is a great book of baseball sort of vocabulary and metaphors called the Sinister Third Baseman, which is like usually the third baseman is also left-handed. Like it's great to be a left-handed pitcher, um,
Oh,
but
that makes sense. Yeah, yeah.
this is also I would say your most baseball book, Brandon. Like
Right.
I as someone
Yeah,
who
there's a
grew
little
up
baseball in here. It's a
as someone
little
who grew
Sandlot
up,
action.
and there's something really literary about that. It's almost impossible to put a baseball reference in the book and not have like some other sort of literary reference. Did you have other like baseball books in mind, or you know, Roth
Not
or
not so much, except for thinking about one way that Milton was another way for him to attack Matthew is to sort of tell this story about his dad being a
Mm-hmm.
southpaw pitcher and trying to make the Big Red Machine, the Cincinnati Reds, which was a amazing team in the 70s, and tried out and didn't make it, and ended up getting an injury from a jealous lover, and um, but the idea also that there is something sinister about the left hand, right? That I that um, the title, "The Devil is a Southpaw," is from the book, a fictional 1971 low budget film starring John Wayne, where he
Right.
is killing native people, which he often did, and
Right.
plays the devil, John Wayne, and so all that just kind of fell together, I think, because I was playing with this idea of what fictional film could Milton reference, because he's a very obsessive character. He's obsessed with TV shows, and certainly mentions the plot of Alf in the book being sort of like, in something going on in his life, and he mentions, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and Strangelove and Doctor
Mm-hmm.
Strangelove, and so I thought, I'm gonna play around with a film here, so that's that was a lot of fun to reference that fictional film.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in film in general, I would say is another sort of theme or reference point for you and or for the characters. And like I said, I mentioned Charlie Chaplin stuff in
Mm-hmm.
Desolation, and the similarity with that is that it is a sort of reference point, like in High Fidelity, where he's like, "Oh, this shit matters," books, films, movies, music that you do. Like this is common reference points. So
It's not what you're like, it's what you like.
right,
Yeah.
and so I think there is a lot of that. Like there's a section in part three that's called "In which the fool reads Shakespeare and Matthew runs away," and this is Milton talking about some of my obsessions at the time included films that I felt spoke specifically to me. And then he goes through a long list of stuff he was obsessed with.
Yeah.
Last Metro, Adventure, Last Tango in Paris, Throne of Blood, The Devil is a Southpaw, Lacombe, Lucien, Basquiat, Anna Karina, and it just goes on and on. East of Eden, The Elephant Man, St. Francis of Assisi, Boomtown Rats, Paris Belongs to Us, Peter Sellers, Pale Flower, Pink Floyd's Shine On You Crazy Diamond, Christina Rossetti's Poetry, MTV, After Hours, the Scorsese one, Raleigh Fingers, Johnny Bench, Hamlet, Live Aid, All the Saints. Like this is a great
Mm-hmm.
sort of list. Um, and I love the just sort of brain dump of like, here's what I'm into. What are you into? Here's what
Yeah.
influenced me. Here's what influenced you.
Yeah.
Um, and that mention also of the saints and Saint Matthew, and there's a little
The
more Christian.
mystics. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a little more sort of Christianity in this book than the
There
previous
is.
two.
Yeah, and the
You,
part of that is him just I have you ever met the I wanted Milton to be this kind of person, especially even later on, where you could say, what kind of movies do you like? Oh, I like everything. I like this and this and that. Or somebody with music. It's like, I like everything. I could, alternative rock, classic rock. I like jazz. And it's like, can you narrow it down? He can't
If you
narrow
like
anything down.
everything, do you really
He
like
likes
anything?
everything, and dangerously obsessive about it. Um, but the also becomes in some ways later on in his life obsessed with his I don't know, his obsession with spirituality, I guess, specifically the mystics and the saints. At the time, I was reading. I don't know if you guys have read the Confessions by Saint Augustine. It's
It's
a
like very small portions. I think
long time
I
ago
own
in
it, but
college, it
I've
was
never.
required
Yeah.
reading.
Yeah.
yeah, it's you really got to stick with it. But that's what he's referencing there, and then it's kind of his retreat into solitude, dealing with his own sort of whether he knows it or not, his mental illness,
Mm.
sort of breakdown with his drug and alcohol issues. Where there's one point in part three where he says, he had this sort of pet rat that he had by the river. He'd found by the river, and he's dancing drunkenly to fiddle music at the Spotted Dog, which, by the way, is a real bar here in Las Cruces,
Oh, cool.
um, in which I usually go Sunday afternoons. I'm not there today, but
Sorry,
uh,
Spotted Dog and Brandon. Sorry.
it's, yeah. So, but him dancing wildly to fiddle music, drunk, just in this kind of place where it's like, he had hit rock bottom, and then his way out was to retreat to solitude and um, to kind of humble himself, I guess.
Well, and there are a lot of similarities. I was thinking, as I was reading this about prison and being in jail or being locked up, there's a lot of
Hmm.
similarities between that and sort of being locked away in a monastery.
Oh yeah.
And that you're in a little cell, you can't go out and do drugs and party.
Hmm.
You are sort of forced to do like wholesome activities. Like they are
Yeah, and
they
manual
ha-
labor
they
too.
have to
Yeah.
like they have to work, but they also have to like read. And they end up talking about movies and books and writing bad poetry. And also this sort of focus that he finds himself able to go into sort of his own head a lot, which is very similar to like the lives of the saints. And that
Yeah.
there's a sort of asceticism
Hmm.
in both.
There's also the like life group that the kids have to do in the prison with. Is it Vincent? Is that the leader's name?
Vlad Siren.
Vlad, yeah,
Oh
Vlad.
yeah,
Vlad.
yeah, yeah. This kind of introspective quality to like thinking about the bigger questions of
Well, and,
life and
and
like
that's
what have
part
my
of it
choices
too.
meant
Is
and yeah.
it's kind of a suspicious name, right? That I,
Like Vlad the Impaler.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I mean, part of that too is, Matt, you're exactly right that this retreat into solitude is where Milton sort of feels the most comfortable, like really, in compared to being locked up and spending so much time in solitude, and um, and really, I mean, for him, it's he's not able to handle living out in the real world. Finds himself, falling into drugs and alcohol, and so he retreated to basically living in a yurt and trying to pursue this spirituality, right? Which is what a lot of people, I think, who are incarcerated
Hmm.
often do.
Yeah, it's like a response to trauma,
Yeah,
of
I
which
think
there's a great deal in this book. Like they're basically just being haunted by this experience in their youth of being locked up in this place, right?
right.
Um, so that seems like a major thematic point here. The guards in the story are really interesting factor into that kind of trauma narrative. These like very white, very militant, kind of like ex-military guards who are running this youth prison, basically mostly for indigenous youth. We mentioned the list of things that he loves. There's a great moment on page 163 where the list of the things that the guards hate, which is new wave music, mauve, and magenta vegetarians. It's a really nice contrast point to that. I wondered if you could talk a bit about the guard characters. I mean, the title of this novel comes from something uttered by one of them. I won't want like reveal that fully for the listener. But what if you could unpack the guard characters as sort of what do they sort of typify in this sort of indigenous specific racism trauma things that factor heavily into the book?
Yeah, just a lot of the kind of over masculine
Hmm.
um, country sort of militant bullying way of directing kids to follow order,
Hmm.
right? This is the order things have to be done. And part of it in this, some of they're just nuts, some of
Yeah,
them.
truly, totally. Um,
And that's part. Yonder shines the big red moon over the devil's last playground, I believe is the line, I
oh yeah,
think.
so elements of the title, not directly. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. And this unhinged, there's this kind of unhinged, um, militant
Hmm.
behavior that I just wanted to really play into the trauma from. Uh,
I really got the sense from this group of characters that this is really kind of a metaphor for colonialism, which is like, here are these white characters who are imposing this, like, their sense of European order on indigenous peoples around the world, particularly here in Canada and the US in this context, and trying to like trying to suggest that here is the real way you ought to live. But the real way that they present to them is like absolutely fucked. Like, it's absolutely absurd. Right? Like, these guys are so messed up, and what they're suggesting to these kids is so unhelpful and deleterious.
yeah,
Yeah.
there's an absurdism to it,
Mm-hmm.
and again, I think that goes back to my love of absurdist novels,
Mm-hmm.
which I know you all, love as well. Um, yeah, so that's exactly right. That's a big part of their role in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And as the villains, there's some sort of natural association with, like, we'd mentioned Christianity, like
Mm-hmm.
Paradise Lost, like the devil is the bad guy, but like more complicated in Paradise Lost than the Inferno, maybe. But the actual devil, there's some appearance with like horns, and I wanted to. It made me think of this great quote from Antonin Scalia. Was one time being interviewed about he was a very Catholic person,
Right. Yeah.
super religious, and in an interview with a reporter one time, he made some comment like, well, we have to like escape our natural tendencies, like that's what the devil wants us to do. And the reporter was like, are you actually like quoting the actual devil here? Like, you really think like the actual devil exists? Like, are you really think this is something that people have to worry about in their day-to-day lives, is like what the devil is going to do? And he was like, yeah, of course. He's like, I'm a Christian, like believing in the devil. That's like
It's
Catholicism
101.
101.
Yeah.
It's like, you have to, if you believe in God, you have to believe in the devil. And I don't think that's necessarily true, but it was sort of stunning at the time to think, Supreme Court justices' ideas are being influenced here by, uh, something that hasn't really changed since Dante, or some
Yeah.
sort of dogma that's dates back a couple thousand years. And it's like, should it really be that controversial that people still believe that? I don't know. Um,
I think, I mean, certainly growing up in Oklahoma, I hear that all the time, heard that all the time. Um, and so I think you're right. It, there's something, I think in this book, I didn't want to focus too much on that, but it does feel like you know, it's still around and it's still part of behavior.
well, and the idea of hell on Earth, I mean, this is for a lot of people would be being locked up, right? Like
Yeah.
being
This
Yes.
having
is
your
a
having your freedom taken away, having your free will sort of taken away.
Mhm.
And I mean, you maybe mentioned this in some other interview that you've had some experience working with juvenile offenders in the past, and like,
Hmm.
how much of that informs this, but also like your own personal ideas or fears. Like, maybe that's less of a fear of, like, to me that's still a huge fear, like you would end up in prison somehow, like I'd be
Oh,
wrongfully
yeah.
accused of something, and I
Yeah.
would go to jail,
Yeah.
and I'd just be tortured. Like, that sounds like the definition of hell to me.
Mm.
Yeah. That is, it's terrifying, isn't it, to think,
Yeah.
uh, you being locked up and losing your family and everything, and um, that's part of this book, um, and especially going with the escape. I wanted this kind of just this whole descent into hell is what kind of Milton is trying to convey here in this story, and so I do feel like in a way, he's kind of trying to write his own Dante book, right? That this is hell for them, and it becomes even more and more surreal in their punishments, and even when they escape, they're not entirely free because of the people they meet, and then they're ultimately right confronted with more people trying to capture them and so
Mm.
forth.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about the role of abjection in this book because there's so much like very specific language and description about like death, decay, rot, um, like just there's a lot of disgusting stuff in this novel described.
Mhm.
Um, and I wondered if this too is maybe a metaphorical kind of the teenager's experience in this place that just has no hope. That there's just rot and death and nothing hopeful coming out of it. And also is kind of maybe like a metaphor for this kind of indigenous specific racism that we talked about with the guards maybe. And then we get into this kind of like fever dream quality of the
Yeah,
book too, which is related to all this death and rot and stuff. And
it's
um,
it's not so much racism, I would say, as it's just this kind of hellish environment and
mm-hmm,
atmosphere all around them, which
mm-hmm,
is great. The way that I feel on gray days when the sun isn't out. I mean, one
mm-hmm.
of the things I love about southern New Mexico is the sun shines 360 days a year here,
Well,
and
that's pretty good.
even when it's cold out, it's
It's
this
bright.
usually the sun is shining, and that and my wife, for our mental health, I feel like we need
Yeah,
that.
that's an
So
upper. You've
yeah,
really painted like the most depressing place on earth in this book. I feel like it's so bleak. Like through the like description of nature and landscape and the forest is this place with like these forest dwelling people who want to suck your blood. Like it's just like it feels so evil. It's amazing. Like you really captured something so um like profoundly dark and bleak here, but it's also lovely to read. It's a weird
well,
paradox, yeah.
thank you. I know. I
Yeah.
mean, part of that is probably parts of Oklahoma to
Mm.
me that feel like hell.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, I worked in juvenile incarceration out in the country at this facility where they're 10 minutes before you drive to get to a restaurant or something, and and the whole area was just very kind of very just empty and
Mm.
dead,
Mm.
and um, yeah, so there may be some more my subconscious may have been accessing more of that experience a little
Yeah.
bit, I think. But I always thought, even when I worked there, I thought, oh, I've got to at some point I'm going to write a story or something about this whole experience of
Oh yeah.
the justice system
Mm-hmm.
and the way that people interact with each other, and under the authority kids under the authority of the justice system.
Yeah. How many years
And
did you work in that context for?
I did 7 years
Oh wow. Okay.
in well in that time I had three different jobs, I think, but all within uh, all at the same facility. Just
Mm-hmm.
I did probation for a while, where I worked with kids who were on probation, and so we would have
Mm.
to. There was the facility where I worked. There was a courtroom in there, and so I go into court with them, and there's all kinds of
Yeah.
stories that you just wouldn't believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's a
Well, and one thing about that too, I think when we were talking earlier about the juvenile justice system in general, and these two characters in particular, and how they're traumatized or not, is that when you meet a lot of young people, which I'm sure you have as a teacher too, and I do have a teacher question for you,
mhm.
is that there's so much potential, and that you meet these young kids and you think, wow, this kid is the smartest kid I've ever met, and they're going to go on to do great things. And that rarely happens.
I have a
It's
kid like that right now in my school. Who's
yeah.
like the most gifted poet I've ever encountered in my real life, maybe. And they're in grade 10 right now. And
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's get you published. I'm putting, let's get the feelers out there. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean that level of potential, and this is sort of one of the undercurrents of the book, is like it's pretty rare, I think, in juvenile justice systems now to meet kids who are really into reading books and writing literature and poetry and painting and like this is more of like almost like a diversion program or addiction rehab programs where
Right.
maybe it's more likely that the sort of creative people end up in these traps. But seeing that potential, I mean, I know for my sake, like some of the smartest people I grew up with in rural areas never left and never really did anything with their lives.
Mm.
Yeah.
It wasn't because they weren't smart. It was because they live in a really poor rural area where
Yeah.
there's no fucking opportunity to do anything. If you want
Right.
to pay rent, you might have to go work at Dairy Queen.
Right.
And I
Mm.
think that that's sort of the tension of the book too, that like there's this pull away from themselves that ends up getting them in trouble many times, probably over. But then there's sort of literary sensibility. I mean, Ichota is like portrayed as sort of once in a generation sort of
Mm-hmm.
talent.
Yeah, that's it. And I think certainly Milton is, there's the question of it, with him, his reliability, unreliability, how he's either playing that down or playing it up, in terms of what he's revealing about him. But that's certainly, that. But I mean, one of the things when I worked there is that kids, I found there was nothing else to do except read, and we had books back there that kids would. We the TV was off, and it would be after dinner or something, and it's just like we're just gonna take an hour of reading time, and so they would just sort of go over, pick out a book or whatever, and then what happened is that they sort of discovered that they wanted to read the same book. They wouldn't, they would read it, and then later on they would say, "Can I have that book? Can I, in my room?" And kind of, so there was something like, as a teacher also, it's like, yeah, I love introducing students to new writers and new books. We're doing this with kids who had never really spent any time reading before, and there's something great about that. I mean, I remember a kid sitting over on a wing by himself because he had been in trouble, but he had a book and he was laughing. And I remember going in there and saying, "Hey, what's up?" And he was pointing out something that he had read in the book. He was just like, "I'm sorry, I just read this scene and whatever. I don't remember what it was, but
Uh,
that." And there was something remarkable in that moment. I remember thinking, "Wow, I bet this has very rarely happened to this kid."
in the history of
You know
this
what I mean?
institution. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
There was a laugh out loud moment for me in this book, the letter about the carnival ride accident,
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
where it's difficult to determine if your husband's screams were of pleasure or terror. I personally hope those were shrieks of pleasure after this horrific accident.
It-
That was
This is
great.
one of
yeah.
my sort of random questions for you, Brandon. Is there are a fair number of letters in the book,
Yeah.
and like, how did you land upon that? Is just that it was set in a sort of pre-internet time, or did you just think like, oh, I would just tell this part in a letter? Like, what was your
Part of
thought
the, yeah, the
process there?
pre-internet, and again, I'm thinking, drawing on my own experience of, there was time spent in the classroom where it was letter writing time. That also, that I've always loved, and I still love writing letters. And although they're emails now, I email with people often, sometimes almost daily, and it's a kind of, in letter form, basically a kind of formal email. I was doing that, as you all mentioned, in the early '90s. I was when I was young. I loved writing letters and wrote to my favorite writers, and so that's part of it is my love of the letter. I just love letter writing.
Yeah, I can relate to that as well, and I think it is got a long literary history. There's a lot of um, famous books that have epistolary novels or framing, um, and we've talked about that in the past. Another thing I wanted to mention when you were talking earlier about Matthew Ichoda sort of being this great um, sort of natural born talent. This is a very minor thing, but I just love that his initials are ME. I loved that. I think that was really great.
Oh,
That
yeah.
it's like it's me.
Well,
It's me.
and part of that too was Milton early on, and this is I didn't pull this off. I'm not good enough to pull this up. But early on, I was toying with the idea that Milton and Matthew were the same person, and I've not told
Mm.
many people. I'll tell you all this because I like you guys, but
And we're going deep on this book, man.
So it's
We're
kind
going
of a bit
deep.
of a bit of a Fight
yeah.
Club kind of twist at the
But
end.
I mean, a couple of things came to mind, and one was, I was very much thinking about Nabokov, also when uh, his his use of unreliable narrators, and I love Panine, I love Pale Fire. Those are two I just love those books. I was also thinking about a little bit about the screw tape letters. So
Mm.
going back to the letters for a minute,
And
I have a CS
Christianity
in Christianity, and
and the devil.
going back to the at the beginning of the book, there's a C.S. Lewis quote about envy,
Right. Hmm.
and at one point I was playing with a lot more of the sections being in letters, and there's a kind of way that I know Wallace loved that, I guess, or he taught it, right? And
Yeah, yeah.
there's something about the novel and letters that's I find really. I've never taught that book. I'm kind of afraid to anymore, um, but uh, but I certainly was thinking about it and thinking about Milton and Matthew being almost the kind of doppelganger
Hmm.
of the other. If
Hmm.
Yeah, no,
um,
there are other doppelgangers in the book, and so that is sort of a
Hmm.
theme. This sort of doubling of
mhm,
characters of people on
Hmm.
in
Dali.
some Salvador Dali makes a sort of cameo.
Hmm.
mhm.
Frida Kahlo.
Frida
Frida.
Kahlo.
Hmm.
At one time, I had Basquiat in the
Oh yeah.
in there,
Hmm.
and I think I
Well,
cut.
he is mentioned though. He
He's
is
mentioned.
mentioned in
Yeah, yeah,
the
on that
He's
list.
list.
mentioned, yeah. I had a whole scene with him or his doppelganger, and uh,
Hmm.
and then I thought, okay, I'm going. This is too much on the. And again, at that time, I was, the Milton kind of revealing that Matthew is really him to the reader is the Emmy is. I just wasn't pulling it off. This is getting way. This book is fucking weird and difficult enough, and I'm not Nabokov. I'm not somebody. I'm not Pynchon or Waller. Somebody like they could pull it off a lot better than I
Hmm.
could, and so um, so at some point it feels like it's sort of all over the place. And how can I get some control to this book?
Hmm.
And the letters to the control of the book. You mentioned Nabokov. That's also how Lolita starts out with this sort of framing device of
Hmm.
letters, and that's also in Frankenstein. So I mean, I saw it as
Yeah.
part of the literary device, and the literary illusions in general. I mentioned Shakespeare is a big. There's tons of Shakespeare in this book, which
Hmm.
also reminds me of something like that's common to classrooms, or that would be in one of these reading rooms. There's also some Faulkner references, and really the book sort of starting with the end. Like there is a Brandon H character,
Mhm.
like not really if that's your doppelganger or not, which is another part of the doubling, I think.
Yeah.
Um, I know I occasionally get email letters from another Matt Booker. There's like probably
Oh, really?
20 of probably like 20 of
Right.
us. Like one of them drives
Yeah.
a Jeep because he gets a lot of shit from Jeep. Um, and all kinds of these other sort of bizarre parallel universes that exist without us. And the this I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you a couple of random questions that I had while I was reading, and then I'm going
Mhm.
to turn it over to Dave to do the same thing. One of them is about, we mentioned the sort of hellish nature. There's a plague. There's a sort of rain of
Rain of
frogs,
Frogs, yeah.
which we've seen before in the movie Magnolia, but I
Yeah.
think it probably even predates that of going back to the plagues in the Bible. So,
Yeah.
you
Mhm.
know,
Page
I'm
94, we
I'm
got this,
assuming
yeah.
you had seen Magnolia before you wrote that.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah.
Did you think it was grad schoolish in a bad way? Like Wallace did?
Oh,
When
of
he said to Don
Magnolia?
DeLillo? Yeah, Don
Oh,
DeLillo.
I disagree with Wallace on that. I think
Oh, yeah,
Magnolia
me
was
too.
great.
I agree.
I like Magnolia. Yeah.
hmm
I
hmm
I don't
I
know
don't
that
know.
quote. Did he say?
Yeah,
Did
in a
he?
letter to Don DeLillo, he said like, "Run, don't walk away from this movie" or something. It's bad.
Oh God.
It's grad schoolish in a bad way. That's in the
Yeah.
Ransom Center. Yeah.
Um, Another kind of crazy question, but you've achieved a lot. Um, I asked you sort of about the freedom to write whatever you want, which you kind of have an interesting method of doing that, which I approve of, which is to like don't be 100% honest with your editors and agents about what you're writing. um,
Right.
the end question that I have for you though is like, do you feel that you have the energy as you get older to sort of surpass your earlier work and write something sort of even bigger, grander, and more ambitious? Like, what are your plans?
I don't know what I'm going to do next. Right. I mean, I'm
Short story collection. We know that you mentioned
the
that.
story collection, which I have several stories that I'm revising and putting together to fulfill this contract with my publisher. But um, after that, I don't know. I I'm sure that I will begin a new novel. I just don't know um, yet what that's going to be. I something will something will click at some point, and I'll do it. But I don't know what. I mean, I'm always going to be writing. I know that. Um,
So you might have a couple of novels in progress at the same time, or do you pretty much find one and stick it out?
I usually think of one and stick it out. Yeah, I try to just keep working on it, and um, I'm a really disciplined writer because I can sit down and for a couple of hours or a few hours most nights or most days and get in some pages. Now those aren't always great pages, of course, especially early on, but I usually don't have that much trouble getting the stuff down. It's just no. Is it just dead? If it's dead, yeah, I don't know how much stuff I've written that is just awful that I just trash. You know, that.
Not even darlings.
Well, you have to. I mean, that's part of the
You just
process.
stab him in the chest with a butcher knife.
But you're
Yeah,
putting in the work, and I think it's rare as the person that is able to publish everything that they write. I mean, that's crazy. Like, I think,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, and that happens. I think a lot. This collection is not going to be a long collection because I have a bunch of stories out there, but I mean, I'm not crazy about most of them, to be honest. I feel like they're all pretty, so many of them are just kind of mediocre stories. And in some ways, writing a short story is more difficult, and it certainly seems less fun than writing a novel.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a discrete task with less opportunity to really explore some things, I feel like. But
Right.
Like
Yeah.
the
Yeah. I mean,
margin of error seems really small 'cause it has to
it
be drawn
is, and
tight. Yeah.
the constraints of the story, even probably a long story. I don't know that I've written anything really that long of a story, nothing longer than 20 pages, but um,
when they're
yeah,
done well, I mean, we prior to you, we had Jonathan Lethem on the show, and
yeah.
he recommended a story collection to us by Robert Stone called Bear and His Daughter, and it's like that book is fucking amazing.
Oh wow. Okay. I
Um,
haven't got to it yet. That's good.
I
and
haven't read.
holy
Wow.
shit, that book is mind blowing in how different each story is, how similar each story is, and how sort of self contained they are. And like the first one is like really brutal, and I mean I'm like reluctant to even describe to you about what it's about,
Oh, okay.
but it has to do with abortion, and like that story I was like shook. And the one that he recommended to us is about a sentient dolphin, and it's this woman who's taking drugs, and she goes to this aquarium, and she's convinced that she can communicate with this dolphin just through her mind.
Telepathic.
And like it turns out that the dolphin is like not a kind loving creature, it's basically like fucking Hitler. And like the dolphin wants to like just eliminate everyone who's
genocide?
not yeah, just
Not
do
a
a
dolphin?
genocide. And
All the
it's
whales and
amazing,
sharks of the sea.
it's fucking amazing. So like
you-
when a short story is good, like I mean it is like good. Like I don't want to
Yeah,
read
they
a
can
whole
be so
novel of that.
memorable.
Like I
Oh,
don't need a
right.
whole novel of that, but like 15 pages of that, I was like, holy shit.
Have you read Lethem's story? I think it's called "Man Bleeding on Skype."
Yes,
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
in
yeah.
the latest
Yeah,
one.
that's in his.
That was
Yeah,
in
it's
the
in his,
latest one.
yeah, in his newest collection. I remember when that came out in, I think it was Conjunctions. I think, maybe I don't know, maybe not. Um,
Something like that. It was
but
a big one.
yeah, it's really and Lethem is one. He's one of my. I write letters to him. We
Oh, that's
correspond pretty
fun.
regularly.
Connection. Cool.
Yeah, he's great.
Yeah.
So anyways, that was my last question. Dave, any final thoughts for
Yeah,
you?
I got two final thoughts. On page 207, there's a conversation with the Dali sort of doppelganger character. They're talking about their kind of experience being locked up in this juvenile penitentiary or whatever. Think of it as solitude, privacy. It's a blessing in disguise that'll lead you to write about it someday. Write a novel about it, a metafiction, something literary in the future, when literature is dying and the American public are all reading dumb celebrity stuff. You guys want to talk about the future? And I mean, there's a lot of great meta stuff going on in this quote about this book itself, obviously. But I wondered if you could maybe unpack this sentiment here that literature is dying and Americans are just reading dumb celebrity gossip stuff on the internet. Is that like, to what extent is that kind of your diagnosis of what's happening in the literary landscape and the intellectual landscape of America right now?
I've just always felt like that. I don't know if you all.
Yeah.
It's such a small percentage of us who really try to seek out great books. It feels
That's why the
like.
audience for this podcast is so small, right? Like 9 or 10 people or whatever it is, Matt.
Hey,
I,
it's
get-
quality, not quantity.
That's
I
right.
just get disappointed, that when I hear what people are, in the mornings on the daily morning, good morning, whatever, those shows where they start recommending books, and it's more and more celebrities are having these book clubs, and
Oh yeah. Natalie Portman.
Yeah, uh, we have to rely on finding a circle of people for like. I'm glad that you mentioned this Robert Stone book because I know it's going to be great now because I totally
It's
trust
great.
you and certainly
We trust
certainly
Matt, yeah.
people. Yeah, it's like so I'm excited. I'm going to buy this book for sure, and yeah, I mean I think that's basically.
How much of it do you think is print related? Because for me, I think the death of print is really fucking sad, and like I'm nostalgic for it in a very specific way, because I grew up like even I'm nostalgic for those B Daltons, right? Where the big magazine racks and like
Yeah,
everyone subscribed to multiple magazines, and you went to the doctors and you read a magazine, and it's like now everyone is just on their phones all the time, and the phone is going to kill every single thing. And to me, that is like there's some backlash to it, but we're never getting like the Virgin Megastore expanding into small towns with more. Like Borders is gone, like
yeah,
Tower Records is gone. Like we're
yeah.
not getting these like there's so much of it just continues to pile up that for me a lot of it is like the medium is the message, and
Hmm.
that you could be a reader who had tons of books in your home, and now like you said there's fewer and fewer of us who value that. Like I feel like it's more of like, oh, I listen to it on my audiobooks, and I
Yeah.
have a Kindle and whatever. It's fine, but it's not the same to me. It does feel like we're missing something just by not having the print culture.
I mean, I agree with that. Any used bookstore that I can go into. It's just this amazing experience anymore. I just like what am I going to find? I know I'm going to find something, and I think it's like that with music for me too. Yesterday, as a matter of fact, a local radio station here had a sale. They were selling vinyl, and I went in.
What'd you pick up?
I I all I found for $8 was an album by it's from the '80s. The band the Bodines. Do you know
Okay.
that band?
I don't think so, no.
They're not really. They're kind of a T-Bone Burnett, kind of a
Okay.
twangy alternative country almost sort of.
Okay.
That's all I. It was yeah, for $8. It was really a terrible selection of like even I went through all the jazz stuff and I thought there's got to be something good I'll find in the jazz, and it was just awful. But
Okay.
um, yeah,
Speaking of all country, did you listen to the Ryan Davis and the Roadhouse Band album this year?
no, is that I'm gonna write it down
I
then.
think I think you would probably dig this. Yeah.
Okay,
Um, it's
Ryan
called
Davis.
New Threats from the Soul. Great album. Very alt country, very twangy, very funny, smart, clever lyrics. It's
Oh,
wonderful.
that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like
No,
in
I
my top 3 albums of the year, probably.
really okay.
Yeah,
No,
it's
I'll
real
look.
good.
Yeah, thanks for. There's so much. I have Apple Music on my
Yeah, me too.
on my phone. Yeah. Oh, you are. We should.
We are rare Apple people. Yeah, everyone's
Yeah.
Spotify. It's
Yeah.
nice to find another Apple user.
I'm. We should exchange playlists or something on there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've got a best of the year one that I make every year. I'll send you this year's. Absolutely.
So Brandon, this has been really great. Thanks so much again for making the time and being here today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been a real joy for me.
And thanks
Yeah,
to our
thank you, Brandon.
listeners for listening. If you've enjoyed the show, this episode, leave us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. All of our episodes are also on YouTube. And if you want to become a member, we have a Patreon. We have our bonus episodes there. You can do that at patreon.com/concavity show. What else, Dave? You can email us.
Email us at concavityshow@gmail.com. We're Concavity Show on Instagram, which is basically like the last social media platform that we use, the last bastion of which is, has its own serious issues and problematic nature, but we got to be somewhere, I guess. So we'll stick that one out.
And we will be back with a new episode soon. So thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks again,
Thank
Brandon.
you.
Great talking
Yeah.
to you, as always.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Catch me now as I sing.
How are you, Matt?
I'm all right.
Yeah, you hanging in there? December's kind
Yeah.
of nuts. I'm finding
Yeah,
it's
I
just
was
too much
hanging
shit
out with
on me.
Chris Ayers last night,
Oh, right.
and I told him I'm going to do dry January, but
Mm.
in the meantime, I'm doing wet December. So, so I was like, I'm not easing into it, man. I'm like,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
gonna just fucking party hard the next 2 weeks. But
yeah. I had a few small beers this weekend too. Yeah.